All right. So let's start at the beginning. And actually, we're on the first slide. The purposes of parliamentary procedure. Number one, to ensure majority rule. Procedures will provide that assurance that the majority is getting its needs met. But while you are ensuring the majority rule, you are also protecting the rights of the minority. You're protecting the rights of the absentees, those who may not be at your meeting. And you're also protecting the rights of individual members. So yes, you want to make sure that the majority rules, but you also want to protect the rights of the little guy as well. Because as a presiding officer, it is your responsibility to do all of those things. Also, the purpose is to provide order. And I know that many of us have attended meetings. I have a cousin who talks about a lot of times how sometimes there's certain things that go awry in her church organizational meetings. You want to be able to provide order. You want to be able to provide fairness and equity, and you want to have and maintain a sense of decorum. So those are the things too that parliamentary procedure will do. And then finally, you are actually facilitating, ensuring and making it easier, the transaction of business, and you're expediting meetings themselves. So if anyone ever says to you, well, why do we need guidance in parliamentary procedure? Why do we follow these rules? These are the reasons why that we have parliamentary procedures. And I wanted to say too, that all procedures are not Roberts. People talk about Robert's rules, and Roberts is the Bible, and many, many organizations follow Robert's rules. But if you know anything about Congress, they are under Jeffersonian rules of order. That's all, involves the yielding back of time and different things like that. So not everyone adheres to Robert's rules of order, but rules of order facilitate these things that I've talked about. So let's talk about the rules that govern an organization in terms of the hierarchy of what you adhere to first. So, of course, in the very top is state and federal law. In your organization, you can't do anything that will break the law, whether it's state guidance or federal guidance, those things will govern corporations. They also govern tax-exempt organizations. You have certain things that you have to adhere to if you are a 501c3 or a 501c7. And so, any kind of public legal body or whatever, the state and federal law is the top level of guidance. After that, you have what we call articles of incorporation. And these are things that are applicable to corporations. Say, for example, if you have a major meeting or a conference, an international or a national conference, very frequently, the first thing you will see is that individuals will bring forth the charter. That's the oldest document in the organization, and nothing can go on without the presentation of the charter. So articles of incorporation or charters, that's the second level that governs you. Then you have your governing documents of your larger organization. So many of you may serve as presiding officers or parliamentarians in chapters of something. If you have a chapter, then all of those chapters get together, and there are specific governing documents. Some call them constitutions. Some just have bylaws. Some have constitution and bylaws. Some have manuals of standard procedure. All of those kinds of things are the governing documents of the parent organizations. There is one organization to which I belong, and they have a handbook, and the handbook is the governing document of the entire organization. Then you have your local constitution and bylaws. And most local is at least things that are chapters. If you are in an organization that's a chapter of something else, we don't have constitution. There's only one constitution, and that is of the parent organization. But you will have your bylaws, and your bylaws kind of delineate the how of something. And then if you have further delineation and you're talking about the what of something, that would be your guidelines. Okay, so you have bylaws and guidelines. The bylaws provide the how, the guidelines provide the what. And then you, of course, you want to have your standing rules, and your standing rules are the operating procedures, your guidelines. They're consistent with all of the things that have come before you. I mean, everything has to align. That's why parliamentarians who serve as chairman of their bylaws committee, a lot of times they have a lot of work to do because they are always looking at the document, always trying to make sure that what they have in their local chapter governing document aligns with the parent organization or the larger body. And of course, you also have rules of order. And like Roberts or Jeffersonian rules of order, this is your parliamentary authority. Now, for most of my organizations, because right now I serve as president of a chapter of one organization, I serve as vice president of an organization, a faith-based organization. I serve as recording secretary for my parliamentary unit that's based in Richmond. And I serve as parliamentarian for 3 other organizations that have kind of like a hierarchical structure. And one is the social organization. Okay. And so you have all of these different positions, and your rules of order will be the parliamentary authority. And for most of those organizations, for me, Roberts is the definitive authority. It's superseded by all of those above it. And then finally, and people don't realize that a lot of times this has an applicability to what governs your organization, and that is precedent and custom. Precedent and custom. So if you are a member of a homeowners organization, and you know that between, and you meet at noon once a month, the HOA meets at noon once a month. And every time you have ever been, you have pink lemonade from 12 noon to 12:15. Well, that may be a custom of the organization. And so it applies only when there are no written rules. If your bylaws are silent on this drinking of lemonade between 12 and 12:15, the first person who raises the issue about that particular custom, then the custom does what they call falls to the floor. So if you raise an issue about a custom, you'll hear people saying, well, I know Robert's rules tells you can speak for 10 minutes on any particular issue, but in this chapter, we only talk for 3 minutes at a time, and we have a timer and everything. If your bylaws are silent on that 3-minute limitation, the moment that someone brings it up for a point of information or an inquiry, that custom will fall to the floor. So these are the kinds of things that you need to know in terms of the rules governing an organization. So let's talk about the basic principles of parliamentary procedure. First of all members have equal rights, privileges, and obligations. All members. the majority, the vocal minority, everyone has equal rights, equal privileges, but they also have equal obligations. Okay, so that's the first basic principle. The second principle of parliamentary procedure is a quorum must be present in order for the group to act. And depending on your particular organization, and also, once again, depending on what you have placed in your bylaws, the quorum is usually set at the beginning of what I call the club year, or the organization of the chapter year, and then that quorum will be established at the very beginning, and then you must meet that quorum for the rest of the time that you are meeting. Okay, so a quorum has to be present. If the bylaws don't establish the quorum, the general rule is that the majority of the entire membership has to be present in order to transact business. That's why a lot of organizations or chapters or whatever they might be, associations or societies, a lot of them will establish the quorum, because the quorum is just the minimum number of persons needed to conduct business. It's not half plus one. And I know a lot of people believe, that's what a majority is, half plus one. Well, yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the quorum has to be that. So your chapter or your society can establish the minimum number of people needed to conduct business. Say, for example, I am the vice president of a church or faith-based organization, and our committee, we have, I think, 14 or 15 on our executive committee. But in order to conduct business, the quorum was established at 5. Okay, so you can establish your quorum, but it's whatever you determine is the minimum number of people needed to conduct business. And if you don't have a quorum, you can hold hands, you can sing kumbaya, you can do everything that you might want to do, but you cannot make motions, you cannot conduct business. And if a meeting drags out and you are losing members, you need to be checking periodically to make sure that your quorum is still present so that you can continue conducting business. The third principle is full and free discussion of every motion is a basic right. Full and free discussion. And, if you think about those two F words, then full discussion means, comprehensive. Free discussion means, I guess, free from fear, free from whatever it might be. But full and free discussion of every motion is a basic right. And that, I think, is why Robert's Rules gives individual speakers 10 minutes and not the requisite 3 that many of us use. The next principle is that only one question at a time may be considered. And I know that you have been in meetings that you have a motion on the floor, and then all of a sudden somebody has thrown in another question, and it's not even germane to what you might be doing. You can't consider that now. Even if it's something valid, you can't consider that question. Only one question at a time can be considered, and only one person may have the floor at any time. So if you have multiple individuals speaking, they're out of order. Whoever asks the chair, to be recognized, that's the person that has the floor. All the others must wait their turn. Other principles. Members have a right to know what the immediately pending question is and to have it restated before a vote is taken. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Members have a right to know what the immediately pending question is and to have it restated before a vote is taken. I know that a lot of people wonder about why some individuals, and I know Dr. Salzberg would always talk about this, write your motions down. O maker of the motions, please write your motions down. Please provide a copy to 2 people. The first person is the presiding officer, and the next person would be the recording secretary. Because number 1, the presiding officer must state your motion exactly as you stated it at least twice during the procedure for motions. And the recording secretary makes a record of all motions, whether they pass or fail or die for lack of a second, it doesn't matter. She is the one that lists the motions. So if you know that you're going to make a motion, even if you scribble it quickly, and of course, when we were in person, this was a little easier, but members have a right to know what the pending question is and to have it restated by the presiding officer. And so you're doing the presiding officer a favor. I'm sorry, not a failure. He might have a hard time restating. And a lot of times the presiding officer will say, can you please restate your motion? Okay, so those are the kinds of things that you will run into. All right, so if you can, write your motions down before you make them. Or if you make them, then you present them to your presiding officer and you present them to your recording secretary. And we'll talk about virtual stuff in a few minutes. No person can speak. I'll say it again. No person can speak until recognized by the chair. No person can speak until recognized by the chair. It seems so simple, but a lot of times it's just so difficult. People get excited, they get emotional, they want to speak out. A lot of times people just want to speak directly to the presenter of the report. You know, they're talking to the chairman, they're not even talking to the person presiding over the meeting. The presiding officer recognizes individuals. And so if you say, Madam President, or if you say, Mr. President, then that president will say, the chair recognizes, and then you know that you've been recognized and you can go ahead and say what you need to say. But just because the chairman of a committee has presented information, you don't say, hey, Margaret, that's not how it works. You cannot speak unless you're recognized by the chair. Personal remarks are always out of order, always. If you're familiar with fallacies of logic, okay, I was an English teacher in another life. And we would teach logical fallacies. And one of the fallacies that I really loved was ad hominem. And ad hominem is Latin for attacking the man or attacking the person. You cannot attack or question the motives of why someone is making a motion or supporting a motion. That's always out of order. So if someone starts out even seems like they're about to provide an off-color remark or attack the person or say, well, you just want this because you want us to hire your grandson, and that person is out of order. So you go ahead and you let the person know that that person is out of order. A majority decides a question, except when basic rights of members are involved. A majority of those in the meeting decides a question, except when the basic rights of members are involved. So if you, and we will talk a little bit about what that might mean, but if the basic rights of a member is involved, if you are cutting off someone in debate, that's that person's basic right. I think you remember if you saw the last principle in terms of a motion or anything should be fully and freely discussed. So if the basic right of a member is involved, then it really requires a 2/3 vote. And we'll talk about that. I'm trying to see why this will not move forward. Okay. In other situations, a 2/3 vote, not a majority vote, but a 2/3 vote is required for any motion that deprives a member. What happened here? Can you still see? What is it that you're seeing?
You're looking at the questions slide.
Okay, so let me go back because I think I was right here. And let's look again. So a 2/3 vote is required for any motion that deprives a member of his or her rights in any way. And so you see cutting off debate or, recess, whatever it might be, you need a 2/3 vote for that. This is an important one, but in a way, I want to look at this next one, Jay. I want to talk a little bit about what this means. Silence gives consent. So in other words, those who do not vote allow the decision to be made by those who do. And if we think about that a little bit, that really applies to anything in society, I think. Those who do not vote allow the decision to be made by those who do vote. So silence gives consent. But I do want to say this. That is not to say that any member has the right to abstain from a vote. Don't be pressured into believing that you have to cast your vote, especially if you feel uncomfortable or you don't have enough information to make a decision. All of those things are perfectly legitimate reasons to abstain. But remember this basic principle: silence gives consent, and those who do not vote allow the decision to be made by those who do vote. So you can't begrudgingly say, well, I don't know how that worked. You didn't vote. You didn't cast your vote. And then the last one is the chair should always remain impartial. That's what parliamentary procedure dictates. You have to be partial. You have to be objective. That is what you are supposed to do. If you feel so strongly about an issue, then you can do what they call relinquishing the chair. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So now we've gotten to questions. And I did not let you know, if you have burning questions, you can place them in the chat. Our chat is open. Yay. A lot of times in meetings, we'll close the chat. But I think that because everybody here is really interested in what we're talking about, the chat has been open, and I will let you know that you can put your questions in the chat, and Mark is going to go ahead and take a look at those and provide any kind of feedback for me. So Mark, do you see anything yet in the chat?
Sure thing. So one was something that I admitted up front. Everybody who attended will get access to a soft copy of this presentation, as well as some other resources. You'll get an email Friday morning with all that information. No questions per se. Valerie Williams restated, you made a particularly great point about the challenge that happens when a motion is made and then everyone starts amending it. And I was nodding my head right along with her. So.
Yes, yes. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. What people don't realize is as soon as they start all this amendments, the amendments have to be voted on first. So the main motion can't continue until you determine the amendments. And so the amendment can be either to insert a word or to take out a word or to change a word or to change the number of sentences. And so be very, very careful when you want to amend. And then everybody wants to amend. And we'll talk a little bit about an opportunity that you do have before the proceedings continue without being recognized by the chair to offer an amendment. But we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Okay, so let's talk about the typical order of business. Why is this important? Well, we talked a little bit about the fact that parliamentary procedure provides efficiency and effectiveness. And so there are agendas and there are things that need to be on agendas. And so Roberts gives you a sample agenda so that you will never question as to those things that you absolutely need to cover in a business meeting. First of all, the chair must do two things. Call the meeting to order. The meeting is adjourned. Okay, so those are the two things. And my husband gave me this really beautiful gavel, and I just absolutely love it. So you must call the meeting to order. And a lot of times what chairman will do, presiding officers will do is they'll look at the time. And, I'm too vain, so I don't wear my glasses. And so I'm always squinting in the corner to find out what time it is. But I will also look again when I am adjourning the meeting. Who is that for? Well, it's for the recording secretary. And a lot of times she's far more efficient than I am. And so she will automatically know the meeting was called to order at 6:15 p.m. The meeting adjourned at 7:37 p.m. Okay, so they're taking a look at all of that as well. After the call to order, you get greetings, usually by the presiding officer, or if you have them, you might have an opening exercise if applicable. Say, for example, as I mentioned before, I'm in a faith-based organization. I am a member of the Episcopal Church. And the Diocese of Southern Virginia, which it goes from the Eastern Shore all the way over to Danville, I serve as vice president for the Episcopal Church Women for the Diocese of Southern Virginia. And so a lot of times after the call to order and we go through some things, we might have a service. We go around from church to church doing these meetings. And there will usually be a priest in charge there. And that priest in charge might at that point do a church service, morning prayer or whatever it might be. Compline if it's at night, whatever it might be, that person will do it. You can do it there. You could also, if you have like a national hymn, you can sing it at the beginning of a meeting. You can also sing it at the end of a meeting, so there are different places to put that too. But if there's any kind of opening exercise, that's where it would go after the call to order. Once that has happened, then you go through your roll call and your determination of a quorum. Now, when we were meeting in person, each person would write their name on a piece of paper, or, toward the end of one of the organizations I belonged to, we got so sophisticated. We had scanners. And so we would scan and everybody would be checked in that way. And that way you do not have to call a roll. Although I will say this, if the presiding officer requests that you call the roll, then the recording secretary must call the roll. If in your documents it states, like say, for example, there are modifications and changes and different things that have occurred because we have been in virtual environments. And so in a virtual environment, if you must call the roll, then you call the roll. Now, you can be pretty shrewd about how you do that. Maybe you're only going to call the names of the people that you have not already accounted for. And that will be probably as similar as you will get to being in an in-person meeting. But yes, roll call. What does roll call do? Well, roll call determines whether or not you have a quorum. And you might ask different people for different things. So the roll call would be done by the recording secretary, and the determination of the quorum might be done by maybe a vice person or assistant person, or maybe for your sergeant in arms, or maybe your technology chairman, if you're doing something virtually. So, but the thing is, the presiding officer must call for the determination of a quorum, because that's the first thing you need to know in order to conduct business. After that, you want to adopt your agenda. So the adoption of the agenda is one of those things that requires a motion. That's how important adopting the agenda is. Why is it important? Well, we're talking about the typical order of business. We're talking about having something to guide you so that you can move efficiently and effectively through your meeting. But we're also providing an opportunity for individuals to have their ability to weigh in on the business that's being covered in the meeting. This is the time that many things, the agenda can still be changed right on the day of the meeting. So Mary Lou has a doctor's appointment, and she really needs to give the information in the meeting. So she may request at that time during the adoption of the agenda to be moved up on the agenda. Or even though she spoke at the executive board, Donna doesn't have a report. So she may ask, can she be stricken from the agenda because the report might have been submitted and people could read it or whatever. So there are reasons that you want to adopt the agenda. And again, the agenda is adopted by motion. The approval of minutes, however, is not. And I know that in a lot of meetings, people will say, may I have a motion to approve the minutes? You don't need a motion to approve the minutes. The presiding officer can approve the minutes as circulated or distributed or corrected. But the agenda has to be adopted by motion. Once you have completed those requisite things prior to the beginning of any other information gathering and information presenting, you will have the reports of the officers. And mostly it's the reports of each officer or officers that may have done something different between the last meeting and now. So you'll have the report, and normally the presiding officer is the one that begins with a report. And again, if you have done a very efficient and effective way of running your meetings, you have tried to circulate your reports in advance. Well, what's the advantage of that? The advantage of that is when your officer gets up to provide her report or his report, the officer can say, my report has been distributed electronically Are there any questions? And then that person that really doesn't have to say anything more. And you have placed the onus of knowing what's in that person's report on the member of the organization. So yeah, it's a good thing to provide reports in advance. And of course, though, you can extract a few salient points, 2 or 3 things that you might want to say, and give that report. So it goes down the line in terms of whatever the reports are. Now, depending on the particular officer, there are certain things that will govern how those reports are handled, how those reports are given, whether or not those reports are encrypted, who is allowed to hear those reports. All of that has a lot to do with reports of officers. For the most part, and we'll talk about it a little later as well, financial officers, they have very special reports, and not just anyone can see those reports. So most members of organizations receive financial reports of the organization, but those reports should be encrypted, or you should be able to retrieve them in the members only section of your website. Or you have to do everything that you can to protect the integrity of financial officer reports. You don't send it on normal, channels. You don't send it out in your Gmail account, and you haven't encrypted it or whatever. That's not how you send things out. As a matter of fact, you can go online and just Google treasurer's minutes, and you will find how many thousands of organizations don't encrypt their financial information, and you can find out exactly how much they have, how much they've made, who is protected by, what particular funds are allocated for whatever. And that's not good. That's providing too much information to individuals who have no vested interest. So you have to be very careful with those kind of reports. After the reports of the officers, you also have reports from committee chairmen. And normally you start with the standing committees first. So whatever your bylaws has listed as a standing committee, those are the reports that are provided. If you have an officer that has a certain committee responsibility, say, for example, your treasurer is usually the chairman of your finance committee. So that person might actually end up giving 2 reports. That treasurer will give the treasurer's report, which talks specifically about the transactions made since the last meeting. But then they might come back as the finance chairman and talk about whatever decisions have been made by the finance committee, or whatever recommendations might be put to the body from the finance committee. So it depends on you in terms of how you want to, or if you want to, separate those 2 reports out. Then you have the reports of your special or your ad hoc committees. Not all committees are standing committees. Some committees might be very germane to your organization, maybe very germane to your chapter, things that occur, but not necessarily at a higher level. And so those are your special or your ad hoc committees. Say, for example, I'm a member of an organization, and I served as the president during its 100th year. And because of that, there was an entire committee devoted specifically to the celebration of the centennial. That's a special committee. At the end of that committee's work, the chairman will file a report, and then that committee goes away. Because that committee was appointed, the chairman and all the other people were appointed to serve a specific function, which will no longer be needed because of the special nature of it. Once you have gone through all of your reports, Then you're going to go to what is called unfinished business. Now, if any of you still have on your agenda old business, take it off, please. There's no such thing as old business. It is unfinished business and new business. So the unfinished business usually is anything that you did not complete the last time you met. And who would know about that the best? Your recording secretary. That is why it is really wise for you, if you are the presiding officer, not to create your agenda in a vacuum. It should never be one person creating the agenda. You should call on your parliamentarian, and you should also call on your recording secretary. Your recording secretary might say to you, Madam President, you know what? We tabled this motion at the last meeting, so it definitely has to be on the agenda for this meeting. My mother used to say 2 heads are better than one, even if one is a pinhead. And so in this situation, you know that everybody has different perspectives. Every month, I would call my parliamentarian as well as my recording secretary, and the 3 of us would get together and we would determine what would go on the agenda. I might have a general idea, but it was those 2 persons that could kind of keep me straight in terms of what the order should be. The parliamentarian would help me do that. And then also let me know what may have been tabled at that previous meeting or something that needs to be brought back up. So that is the unfinished business. Once you've completed anything that was unfinished from before, you're going to go on to your new business. And then once you have completed your new business, in this time again, you would have your program. And I'm not doing it, but it's just very interesting because, again, serving as the vice president for the Episcopal Church women for the Diocese of Southern Virginia, our president had a signature series during her term of administration. But as the vice president, I was in charge of the program, okay? And a lot of times vice presidents not only serve in the absence of the president, but they might be over whatever you do as far as programs and presentations in your organization. So as the vice president, I was in charge of programs. And so I had the joy of executing my president's signature series. And normally, after we had finished with the new business, then we would include a workshop. Okay, her signature program was Unmasking the Mystery of Autism Spectrum Disorder. And so we would always have guest speakers and things like that. And that's where they would come in. They would come in right there during the program. Once you have gone through all of that, then you can include announcements. Normally, your corresponding, maybe even your recording secretary, maybe your communications chairman. It depends on who you have designated. And again, your bylaws might have an indication of who would perform that function, but someone will provide announcements. It might be the presiding officer. The presiding officer can also make announcements. Or if you're real brave, you can open up the floor and then you'll have several different people providing announcements. All of that leads to checking on doing your pulse check. This is for the good of the order. If there's nothing further for the good of the order, then we know that this meeting is adjourned. Okay, so that is the typical order of business. That is how you should approach. This is probably lending itself to the most efficient way of conducting a meeting. So let's talk about very quickly the role of the presiding officer. First rule, remain impartial. It's hard. You might be in your feelings about it. You might feel some kind of way about it. but you have to remain impartial during debate. You can't, even a poker face, you cannot let be known how you feel about an issue. The presiding officer has to relinquish the chair. If you feel so strongly about something, you can relinquish the chair, and then your vice president can conduct the meeting, or at least conduct that particular motion. And then you can debate the merits of a motion based on what you want to do. Otherwise, you're impartial. Also, the presiding officer votes usually only to either break or create a tie. A lot of people understand about breaking a tie. They don't really realize that you can vote to create a tie. And then if you create a tie, then that motion fails. So you can vote only to create or break a tie, or to make something in 2/3 for matters requiring a 2/3 vote. But there is an exception. If you are the presiding officer and you are taking a vote by secret ballot, yes, then you can vote because it is by secret ballot. So in elections and other things, yes, you have a voice then. But on the main motions or the motions that come before the body in a meeting, you don't do any voting. Your parliamentarian doesn't do any voting. We'll talk about them in a few minutes as well. Then you want to determine that a quorum is present at all meetings. That's the first question you ask. Madam Assistant Recording Secretary, is there a quorum? And then you can continue. Also, you have to ensure that your quorum remains. Again, I was talking about meetings that continue almost ad nauseum. They're just going on for 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 hours, and you lose members. At any time that you lose your quorum, then you cannot continue, because you have to have a quorum in order to conduct business. Also, you introduce the business in its proper order, and we just saw the order itself. You also are the one that recognizes speakers. So everyone should say, Madam President or Madam Presiding Officer, not, Lula or whoever it might be giving the report. That's not the presiding officer. You are the only one as presiding officer to recognize who can speak. Also, you determine whether a motion is in order. And this is when your silent advisor, and that's what a parliamentarian is, a silent advisor. That's when your parliamentarian can assist you, just to determine whether or not your motions, the motions on the floor are in order or whatever is happening. If someone talks about an amendment, then you know that you have to vote on the amendment first and then come back to the main motion. So motions can't be out of order. You have to determine whether they're worded or the right ones. Also, you have to make sure that you keep the discussion germane to the pending motion. If all of a sudden you're talking about the fact that the budget kind of crashed and now you don't have enough money to buy the house or what, that has nothing to do, that is not germane to the pending motion. Okay, so you have to keep your discussion germane to whatever is on the floor at that time. And a lot of times there are individuals who want to put the discussion in the motion. And they want to start discussing before the presiding officer has called for discussion. So I move that we buy the van because the vans are really on sale right now, and we will do. That's too much information. The simple motion would be, I move that we buy the van. In discussion, then that person will say, because vans are on sale right now, or whatever it might be. Also, the role of the presiding officer is to maintain order. Now, there are other positions in some organizations, and maintaining order is their job. So if you have a sergeant at arms or something like that, then that person, that's that person's job to maintain order. And so, it's a slippery slope because you're trying to maintain objectivity. You are trying to provide each person an opportunity to speak. Some people have really interesting approaches to discussion. They seem like they're always angry, or even their tone of voice might convey something to you. And so hopefully your sergeant at arms or someone else will do it, or even another member can say, this is not germane to the question, or you are attacking the person, or whatever it might be. But you are also, as presiding officer, you will say, we are not in order here. We need to move on, or whatever it might be. Also, the presiding officer is the one that will put the motion to a vote. Not only does he or she put the motion to a vote, but they also announce the results. Now, that's very specific when you are doing an election, and we'll talk a little bit about that later as well. And then you employ unanimous consent when appropriate. Unanimous consent is what? It's when everybody is in agreement, and so you really don't need to take a vote. Now, I will say this. If your bylaws indicate that you must vote by secret ballot, then, and you only have one person on the ballot for a position, you cannot elect that person by unanimous consent. You still must vote. Why? Because your bylaws say that you are going to use secret ballot. So only unanimous consent is used when, say, for example, you've just taken the roll and then you want to adopt the agenda. Well, having just taken the roll, you can adopt the agenda by unanimous consent. You don't have to take the vote itself. But that's just an example. But especially when your bylaws aren't silent, you don't say, okay, well, this only Mary Lou is on the ballot, so Mary Lou is it, right? No, because the presiding officer also, in all election situations, opens the floor for nominations. Okay, my girl. I love parliamentarians. As I said, my godmother was one. I'm very passionate about them. The parliamentarian is a silent advisor, emphasis on the word silent. If your parliamentarian is talking a lot, she's not supposed to be talking a lot. Silent advisor, slips notes, sends text messages, frantically writes to make sure that you have the motion correct because you're listening and you're trying to do whatever you need to do. Silent advisor knows Robert's rules by chapter and verse so that they can quickly look up information to help you. But only provides that advice only when requested, speaks only when called upon by the presiding officer to illuminate a point or to say where this information is from. The parliamentarian carries neither voice nor vote during motions. So if you have maybe 7 people in the room, I remember the first time I served as parliamentarian for an organization that was comprised of several states. And first of all, I don't know whether they were even used to having a parliamentarian. And then when a motion came to the floor and everybody voted but me, they were like, well, Renèe, did you not understand? And I was like, no, I'm the parliamentarian. I don't have voice or vote. That's why I've not been contributing to the discussion. I am here at the request of my presiding officer. So a lot of times people don't realize that in terms of what the parliamentarian's role is. Again, however, and that's why the little asterisk is there. again, if it is a vote by a secret ballot, the parliamentarian, as well as the presiding officer, can vote. Depending on your bylaws, your organizational bylaws, the parliamentarian a lot of times will also serve as chairman of that committee, because she or he knows specifically how those bylaw changes need to be adopted. She or he knows that, you have to have 2/3 vote, or you have to publish in advance of the meeting what those bylaw changes might be, to give people an opportunity to go over them. So that's why it makes sense that a lot of times the parliamentarian serves as the bylaws chairman, and also serves as an advisor when the presiding officer is creating a meeting agenda. Okay, I've covered a lot. Are there any other questions? Mark, you see anything?
Sure do. So a couple of questions came up along the way. Let me just scroll back to catch them there. So when we were talking about order of business, Lynette Smith asked, how far in advance would you recommend the reports be sent?
Well, it depends. And again, if your bylaws or your guidelines are silent, then, you as the presiding officer may say, okay, I think that in order to give the membership enough time to really go through all the reports, if the meeting is on Saturday, those reports need to be to them by close of business Wednesday or close of business Thursday. But if you don't have anything that speaks conversantly to that, then you might just be going by custom or what has been done before you. Any other questions?
Yeah, so there's one that I may ask Phyllis to unmute herself to give us a little more detail on this, but I'll throw the question to you, Renee, maybe you can catch it as it is. So this was during the role of the presiding officer discussion.
Yeah.
Phyllis asked, when or can a quorum be established with just members present?
When or can, is that it at the beginning? When
or can a quorum be established with just members present?
With just members present. I'm not
Renee?
sure in what context that what they're saying. I guess I would need an example of what you mean by when members are present. Say, for example. Okay, go ahead.
May I speak, please?
Sure.
May I clarify my question?
Yes.
Okay, for
yes,
example, we're in a meeting that doesn't have all of its members present. For example, a church meeting.
Okay.
And just the members who are present at the church meeting will not make a quorum, but they'll never be all the members at the church meeting. So can the members who are present establish a quorum at that time?
In all probability, they can establish at the very beginning of their meeting sessions. Say, for example, if you meet from January to November and you take December off, and then you're coming back to meet in January. At that January meeting, whoever is available at that time, you can determine how many members it will take for business to be able to be conducted. So if you have 20 people at any given meeting, but you know that sometimes the meetings will drop down to 6 or 7, then you can establish that 6 or 7 is the required number of people present to conduct business. that's why I was saying that a lot of people get tripped up on that whole majority, half plus one. You might not ever get half plus one at a meeting. Okay, so you have to be really careful about establishing your quorum, and you establish your quorum at the beginning, and try to move with that, but you have to make it reasonable. What you should do also is go to Robert's rules, and you can look up the definition of quorum. So it never says in Roberts that a quorum is half plus one. And so many organizations believe that. And so they set their quorum too high, and they never get to transact any business because those people invariably don't show up. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Mark, anybody else?
Yep, there's 2 more questions if we've got time for them.
What time is it, Mark?
It's 7:10.
Whoa. Okay. So I have a lot to go through, but go ahead and if we talk about those quickly, I'll go ahead and take those 2.
Okay, absolutely. So Valerie Williams asked during the role of the presiding officer part, what about proxies?
No. And there is as a matter of fact, there is later on in all of my slides, there's something that talks about voting by proxies and not having proxy votes. So Roberts does not advise it. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And the last question?
Sharon Mallory asked, as you went over the parliamentarian's role, can the parliamentarians only vote during a silent vote?
Yes.
Easy.
Yeah. Okay.
That's it.
So let's move on to other officer roles, and I'll kind of breeze through this quickly. Thank you for the time check, because I do have quite a bit to get through, and I'm sure that at some point, if you need me to come to your organization to do some catch up or deeper dives, I can do that. Let's talk about the officer's roles. So about the presiding officer. Let's talk about the vice president. Usually the presiding officer is the president. In the absence of the president, the vice president will preside. So the vice president has to be as conversant in parliamentary procedure as the president, because you never know when you might be called on to do what your president needs you to do. Also, there are secretaries, and there are different kinds of secretaries. The recording secretary is usually the 3rd most powerful officer in any organization. Why? In the absence of the president or the vice president, it is the recording secretary that determines an election for a temporary chairman. She is or he is the person that will say, all right, our president's not here, our vice president's not here. We need to determine by vote who will serve as the chairman pro tem. And so that's what the secretary does. Now, that's usually the recording secretary. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the recording secretary keeps a record of all motions, whether they pass or fail, and things that went on, but not all that was said, but what motions were made. The corresponding secretary, on the other hand, maintains the correspondence, maintains the announcements, does different things related to getting information out. If you have to have information dispatched to your members, the corresponding secretary should be a good writer, because the presiding officer may ask him to craft a letter, making sure that they send that information out. So secretaries have interesting roles and responsibilities. Financial officers, I talked about before. At a minimum, organizations have a treasurer, but in some organizations, you have a second financial officer, and that would be the financial secretary. So the 3rd secretary in that group, you have a recording secretary, you have a corresponding secretary, and you have a financial secretary. Those particular positions are usually bonded positions. because those individuals are handling money. And so depending on your organization, you may not want to give the money directly to the treasurer. Some organizations dictate that the financial secretary receive the money and provide the receipt. And then he is the one that gives that money to the treasurer to do what? To deposit. So there is a process there with the financial officers. As I mentioned before, those reports should not be for anyone who happens to be at the meeting. In certain organizations, when the financial reports are being given, if there are any guests in the room, you ask those guests to leave. And you have a little adjacent room and you play a little jazz and you have a little cheese while you are conducting the business of your finances. And then when you're finished and you are ready for the kumbaya moments and you have a hostess or someone that will talk about the birthdays and the celebrations and all the great things, then those guests can return. But financial reports are not for public consumption. Okay, we're going to go through this very quickly. First of all, I can't say it enough. You have to obtain the floor before you can talk. Everybody starts talking at once. That's not good. If everyone starts talking at once, everybody should be saying, Madam President, Madam President. That's what they should say. And so then the chair will say the chair recognizes, and then that person will be recognized. And then the member makes a motion. And it's not I make a motion that. Please don't say I make a motion that. It is I move that. I move that we purchase the bus. I move that we all wear orange to the football game. I move that we decide that the house that is painted on the corner must change the paint. Okay, so whatever it might be, you move that. Once the motion is on the floor, normally, under normal circumstances, it should be seconded by another member. And, people get all sorts of interesting reasons why they think things are being seconded. All a second does is advance that information for discussion. The person who seconds the motion doesn't even have to be in agreement with the motion. But they're like, you know what? I want to hear a little bit more about this. Second, and that's exactly the way you can do it. You don't have to be recognized. You can just second the motion. Now, there are other kinds of situations too, especially in virtual meetings, a second isn't required. So, it depends on what you are doing. But normally, you have to second the motion. Once the motion has been made and seconded, then the presiding officer will say, it has been moved and seconded that. And then they repeat the motion. That's why it's important for you to be as simple in your motions as possible. And if your motions are complex, it's a good idea to give that information to the chair so the chair can say, it has been moved and seconded that we do da, 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 da. And they can read exactly what your words might be. Once that is restated by the chair, however, any member can rise. And this is a point that a lot of people don't realize. Any member can rise without waiting to be recognized and suggest a modification or a change to the wording to clarify the motion. It's not the same as an amendment, but they can clarify at that point. It has to be right at that point. And so the maker of the motion can then say, you know what, I like the way I worded it. And then they'll just continue with that particular motion as worded by the maker of the motion. Okay, so they can either accept or reject that motion. Doesn't require a second. If the motion is in order already, then the chair will restate the motion and say, is there any discussion? I say, is there any discussion? A lot of people, the word debate has kind of like a negative connotation. So I don't want to use that word, but I will call for discussion because discussion and debate are interchangeable in a motion. So if you call for that discussion, and you know, it depends. There have been individuals and presiding officers have gotten away with it that they don't even call for discussion, that the presiding officer calls directly for the vote. You're not supposed to do that. That can't be done. You have a right to discuss information freely and fully. Remember that other slide that I showed you? So the maker of the motion is the first person to speak in debate. And then that person knows. If they don't know, the presiding officer will let them know. Okay, you know, as the maker of the motion, you have the right to speak first. What would you like to say? And then you give all the reasons why you want this motion to pass. Debate is closed when either you have ended the discussion, everyone has exhausted the pros and the cons of the motion, or a 2/3 vote can say, I call for the previous question. That means you are immediately closing the debate, but it has to be agreed upon by 2/3 of the people who are there. The chair will restate the motion again. So usually you will say, is there any other discussion? Are you ready for the question? The question is on the adoption of the motion that. I'm going to say that again. Is there any more discussion? Are you ready for the question? The question, and some people will yell out, question. The question is not all in favor, all opposed. The question is on the adoption of the motion that, and whatever the motion is, you say it one last time. So you're saying the motion over and over again. That's why it's good to have it in front of you, especially with complex motions. All right. And so then the motion is restated. And if necessary, at that time, they can clarify the consequences of any affirmative or any negative votes. And then they will say, if they say the question is on the adoption of the motion that we do this, all those in favor indicate by aye. All those opposed indicate by no or nay. And so you call for that vote. And then whenever you get that vote, depending on how you do it, and we'll talk about types of voting in a minute, the chair will then announce the vote. They will say, the ayes have it and the motion passes, or the noes have it and the motion is lost. That is the general procedure for handling a motion. But any member can challenge the chair's perception of whether something passed or failed by demanding a division of the assembly. And we'll talk about that too in a few minutes. General rules of debate, and we'll go through them fast. No member can speak. I can't say this enough. This is why you have crazy meetings sometimes, because everybody's talking at once. You have to be recognized by the chair. All discussion has to be relevant to the pending question. No member can speak a second time until everybody has gone around. You know how some members of organizations will say, and another thing, no member can speak a second time until everyone who wishes to speak has had the opportunity. That's the cool part about Zoom. If you use the voting function or the hand raising function, Zoom actually places in order how you are supposed to respond to those people. And so you put your hand down and then you go all the way back to the back of the line if you have a second thing to say. Also, no member can speak more than twice on each motion. So you can't say and another thing, and you have 2 minutes in between these things, and another thing. No, the third thing you can't say. No member can speak more than 10 minutes. And again, that's a Robert's rule, but you as a organization can modify that in your special rules of order. All remarks have to be addressed to the chair. There's no cross debate. So a member can't argue with the giver of the report. Okay, he or she is just given the report. You don't ask them the questions. You have to be recognized by the chairman. No cross debate. It's not permissible to speak against one's own motion, not to speak. But yeah, you can vote against your motion. Even if you made the motion, you are not emotionally or obligated or tied to that motion, especially if in debate you hear that, some salient point has been raised and you're like, So you may have made the motion initially, but you can vote against your own motion, and you shouldn't get any looks saying, what you doing voting? Why are you voting against your own motion? No, you can vote against your motion. You just can't speak against your own motion. Debate must address issues, not personalities. No one is permitted for the ad hominem. No personal attacks. Don't question the motives of why, she just raised that motion because No, you can't do that. The presiding officer, if you feel so strongly, you have to relinquish the chair, and you cannot resume it, after you have spoken until that pending question or that motion has been disposed of and the vote has been given and the outcome. All right, when possible, and sometimes you kind of know, sometimes you don't know. I know you've been in meetings that you have heard 17 people say, I think it's good too. And I think it's good too. And this is the reason why I think it's good. No, you should alternate between those speaking in support of something and those speaking in opposition to something. You don't have 5 people talk about why it's good and no one talk about why it's not good. Because you have to protect the rights of the minority, of those absent. Okay, so you should try to, as presiding officer, you should try to say, are there any individuals that are in opposition to this? I would like to hear from them now, so that your body can hear all sides of an issue. In this of course, this is in very large situations. And again, Zoom is really good for lining people up. So if they have to speak, you know who to call on. And a lot of times your technology chairman in a virtual meeting will help you know who raised his or her hand first. Can't disrupt the assembly. Rules of debate can only be changed by a 2/3 vote. So we know in Roberts, it says that you can debate for 10 minutes. If you decide that you want to put in your special rules that you're only going to debate 3 minutes and you're going to turn on a timer when that person starts talking, that has to be voted on and changed by a 2/3 vote. Questions?
So Renèe, no questions have popped up in the chat since our last little break there. I do want to ask you, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot and not
Mark, why would you do that?
Right. Because I'm evil.
Okay.
I know that we advertised this as going through 7:30 and we're pretty close to that. I am abundantly happy to keep going as long as everybody else is. But in the spirit of fairness, I just want to, remind folks that, if you had other obligations, go ahead and check on those. But we'd love for you all to stay with us as, Renèe takes us through here. There's a lot of interesting stuff ahead, as well as a pretty cool breakout that I know a little bit about. So with that, Renèe, it's back to you. Thanks.
Okay, so I do not wish, and I, Mark, and it was so funny because when I did this, I was much faster because I always rehearse in time and do different things, and I was much faster. So what time do we have, Mark? Because I really don't want to go over. and we could actually break here and maybe do a part 2 later with the balance of the slides. It is 7:29. Oh boy.
Right.
Yeah, it is 7:29. But so maybe if there are any burning questions after all of this is very interesting information. And Mark, if you want, at some point, maybe we can do a part 2 that would continue, because I think we have at least 2 more sections, and I don't want to take up everyone's time. And I hope that this has been beneficial. As a matter of fact, we can at least open the chat up. And if you if you could just give me your top takeaway from this workshop, I'd like to see them in the chat now. If we could go ahead and you can type that, and you can, so I can get kind of a feel for what was good as far as you're finding out about it. And as I mentioned before, and I'm going to just move quickly through these things right here, because these are the other parts that we will be talking about later on. We'll talk about them later on. And that was our information too. But if you'd like and you needed to speak with me, and we can do some of these things later on, I'll go back. I always do that. I'm just trying to figure out, where did it go? Okay, let's go here.
All right.
So if you'd like, you can contact me. My email address is at the bottom. Okay, Escoffery.Torres@gmail.com. Again, it's really an interesting area, and I could, as you can see, I have a passion for it, and I could talk about it forever. But I hope that you have taken some things away this evening. And Mark, I will turn it back over to you, and then that way we can close out if you are ready to go.
Great. Will do. All right, Dr. Renèe, thank you so much for part 1. So now that I said that, should indicate to everybody who's already asking or thinking about it, we will have a part 2. I'll work with Renèe on scheduling it, but right now I'm thinking we'll probably be in the second half of January. So those of you who are embarking on your new roles as presidents and perhaps parliamentarians, you won't get too far into it, maybe just one meeting in before we can do part 2 here. I just dropped into the chat box, and of course people are adding to it, so you might have to scroll up a little bit, a invitation to our January 12th session. It's a roundtable. We're talking about volunteer leadership development. As I mentioned, we cover all kinds of stuff associated with the healthy, successful running of membership associations. So if this one sounds interesting to you, come on in. You'll have to work a lot harder than you did tonight. Or if there's somebody in your organization who's responsible for volunteer leadership development, please turn them on to this as well. There is a survey, for some reason LinkedIn come up. I'd appreciate if everybody would just open up in your browser, you can do it later, survey.pdchr.org. So it's like PDCHR right here on the bottom of my thing. If you look at me speaking, PDCHR.org, survey.pdchr.org. So you go ahead and do that. It'll take you like a minute to do that, and it helps us fix everything. I'm going to leave the meeting open for a little bit here. I see people are still adding some questions that Renèe might be able to follow up on either directly or when we schedule our part 2. But with that, I think it's time to declare victory. I said I'll hold this open for a little bit, but thank each and every one of you for attending. Thank you so much, Dr. Renèe. And I just want to share, Renèe mentioned something about coming up on the centennial year. This is the highest attended, highest registered registered session we've ever had. We actually registered 100 people. So this is our centennial meeting as well. And I thank you all for being a part of that. For those of you who are taking off now, thank you so much. You'll see an email Friday with a link to the resources so far and some other good stuff in that. So with that, so those of you still here, take yourself off, put yourself on camera and wave goodnight to Renee and me. There it is. Okay, thanks everyone. It's time to vote with your feet.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
All right, and with that, we will wrap this up and hopefully we'll see everybody here a little bit later, most likely, like I said, in the back half of January. Good night, everyone.